Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely shatter that heavily romanticized illusion of the good old days. You know the exact trope I'm talking about, right? Those beautiful period pieces with the grand ball gowns, the pristine cobblestone streets, and that simple, wholesome living. Well, actually, scratch that. The real truth? It was a brutal, bizarre, and honestly terrifying battle for daily survival. We're going to use the historical realities sourced directly from the fascinating archives of Weirdward Bound to walk you through just one single continuous theme today: the terrifying daily fight for basic survival before modern comforts. Trust me, by the end of this, you are literally going to want to hug your thermostat. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this: kids drinking beer with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I know, it sounds like absolutely terrible parenting, but back then, it was actually a matter of basic survival. Before the advent of modern water purification and plumbing, drinking a regular glass of water from a local river or well was essentially playing Russian roulette with your life. The water was just packed with lethal bacteria. But the brewing process for beer, that required boiling, which inadvertently killed off those deadly pathogens. So families actually gave their toddlers weak beer simply because it was the only safe liquid available. Crazy, right? All right, moving on to Section 1, the deadly hygiene nightmare. So, everyday cleanliness, something we achieve today with just a simple 10-minute morning shower, used to be one of the absolute most perilous aspects of human existence. Imagine waking up with a terrible fever in the 19th century. Your family calls for a medical professional. You'd think, oh great, help has arrived, right? But historically, the person walking through your door with a medical bag was often the very last person you wanted to see. Seriously, who was actually more dangerous, the disease or your doctor? Here's the terrifying reality. For a massive chunk of human history, doctors just didn't wash their hands. It wasn't until the mid-1800s that the concept of microscopic germs was even fully understood. Before that, a doctor might literally walk straight from performing an autopsy on a diseased corpse to delivering a baby without ever touching a bar of soap. In so many cases, the physician was actively carrying the deadly bacteria right to your bedside. The cure was often way deadlier than the illness itself. And this brilliantly illustrates just how messy things were. Before modern sewer systems, every single house had human waste that had to be manually emptied by hand. Entire cities smelled like open cesspools, and diseases just ran completely rampant through the streets. Compare that to the flush toilet. It wasn't just a matter of convenience, guys. It is literally the invention that saved America and the world from drowning in its own toxic waste. It fundamentally changed the life expectancy of entire urban populations. And the daily hygiene chores? They were just as wild. Before commercially available toilet paper, you wiped with whatever you could find: leaves, corn cobs, or old paper if you were incredibly lucky. And what about your hair? Today, greasy hair means you need a shower. But before modern shampoo, having clean, unstyled hair was actually a sign of poverty. The wealthy loaded their hair with powders and heavy pomades to show off their status. And grandma's boiling dish rags? That wasn't just some weird quirk. That was a necessary survival tactic to kill off the invisible pathogens that clung to literally every surface of a kitchen. But you know, the daily fight for survival wasn't just microscopic. The very environment around you was constantly trying to take you out. Which brings us to our next part: surviving the extreme elements. I want you to think about the room you are sitting in right now. You probably take the temperature completely for granted, right? But for our ancestors, winter wasn't just a fun season of snowmen and hot cocoa. It was a deadly predator. Before modern insulation and regular coal deliveries, half of America was at risk of literally freezing to death right inside their own homes. Without central heating, you basically had a single hearth. If you strayed too far from that fire, your house was completely unlivable. Entire families had to just stop bathing in the winter entirely, just to avoid catching a chill that could easily turn into fatal pneumonia. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the impossible choice our ancestors faced every single day when designing their homes. Before affordable window glass became widespread, your windows were essentially just holes in the wall covered by wooden shutters. In the dead of winter, if you wanted to see what you were doing, you had to open the shutter and let the freezing wind blast right into your home. If you wanted to stay warm, you closed it and you lived in total darkness. Light or warmth. You could very rarely have both. But what about the other extreme? How in the world did densely packed cities survive a brutal heat wave before air conditioning even existed? When summer rolled around, cities basically transformed into sweltering, humid ovens. Summer was historically a terrifying season of death and disease. People used what we'd now call abandoned ancient air conditioning, which were basically architectural designs meant to pull breezes through homes. But what really turned the tide? The electric fan. It literally saved cities by making indoor air somewhat breathable before AC conquered the South. And perhaps most importantly, the humble window screen. Before window screens, opening your window for a breeze meant inviting in swarms of disease-carrying mosquitoes and flies. That simple mesh barrier is an invention that has saved millions upon millions of lives. Let's look at Section 3, Health, Healing, and Survival. 8,000. I really want that number to sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of babies killed by a specific type of unregulated milk in history. Because there were zero food safety laws in this daily fight for survival, producers could, and absolutely did, sell milk that was completely contaminated. Sometimes they'd thin it out and whiten it with dangerous chemicals, just to make a quick profit. And the absolute wildest part? It was perfectly legal. Listen to this. Before hospitals, every woman prepared to die in childbirth. Starting a family wasn't just a happy milestone. It was a massive life or death gamble. Without modern medicine, antibiotics, or sterilized environments, the maternal mortality rate was a grim, ever-present reality that shadowed every single pregnancy. Now today, diarrhea is just a minor inconvenience that sends you to the pharmacy. Historically, it was the deadliest disease in the entire world. Why? Because without an understanding of dehydration, without IV fluids, and with cities serving as absolute death traps full of contaminated water, a simple stomach bug would ruthlessly wipe out entire populations. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because survival was so incredibly difficult, people took massive gambles just to manage their everyday pain. I mean, before aspirin, what did people even take? The apothecary shelves were just full of unknown substances. People were taking medicine before anyone actually knew what was in the medicine. You could easily be given heavy narcotics, toxic metals, or literal snake oil just to cure a headache. And finally, our last section, bizarre social norms and survival. When you live in a world that dangerous and unregulated, human beings adapt in some truly bizarre ways just to survive. Take the baby cage. Yes, you are reading that correctly. In crowded cities where apartments had zero ventilation and disease was literally everywhere, doctors actually recommended that babies needed fresh air to build their immune systems. The grand solution for high-rise apartment dwellers? Build a literal wire cage, suspend it out a multi-story window, and just dangle your infant over the busy street below. At the time, this wasn't considered reckless at all. It was considered cutting-edge, good parenting. The rules of society were entirely dictated by this underlying fear and need to adapt. For about 100 years, married couples just stopped sharing a bed entirely. Why? Because the prevailing medical theory was that sharing breath in a small bed spread disease, which led to the massive rise of twin beds. And outside of health, things were just as strange. Rich Victorians used to actually rent pineapples just to carry them around at parties as a bizarre status symbol of wealth, rather than actually eating them. And society was so heavily regulated that before the modern bikini, police would literally walk the beaches with a measuring tape to ensure women's swimsuits weren't showing too many inches of thigh, making arrests right there on the sand. So the crucial point is this. Humans are incredibly resilient. We went barefoot for 99% of our history. Before real socks and modern shoes, our ancestors traversed freezing snow, scorching sand, and rocky terrain with nothing but calluses protecting them. We endured centuries without locks on our doors, without retirement ages, and without even the most basic comforts. Let's wrap up with appreciating our modern world. We have successfully escaped the brutal, freezing, disease-ridden reality of our ancestors. Seriously, look around your room right now. You have clean water flowing right from a tap, a controlled climate, and a pocket-sized device that contains literally all of human medical knowledge. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder. Which modern comfort do you take for granted the absolute most? Is it the glass in your window, the soap by your sink, or the simple fact that you won't have to go empty your own toilet by hand tonight? Think about it, and let that newfound